We are going live to YouTube, KTLO. KTLO? KTLO? Could this possibly be
Keeping
KTLO? What are we keeping? We're
the learning
keeping the learning
on.
Oh my.
That was horrid.
It gets worse every
It gets
week.
better every week. It does, doesn't it?
Every week it just
Wow.
Yeah, but that was your
worse.
fourth one. You said three.
Yeah,
I know.
I faked you out. So
I went on the third, you know.
I faked you all
Simone
out.
was on cue. Simone was on cue.
So
Who's on first? What's
Yeah.
on second?
yeah, well, whatever.
I don't know.
It is KTLO, keeping the learning on, and it's episode 18. 18 times we have done this on the tube of you and Zoom.
You know that's the legal drinking age in Australia, don't you? 18.
18, yeah.
18 episodes. Yep.
Yeah.
You're allowed to drink.
The legal drinking age when I was a young man was 18 in New York State and 21 in New Jersey. And as you may gather from looking at a map of the US, New Jersey and New York are right up against each other. So there was a little border crossing going on there, I think. I've heard.
What?
Is that anything like bar
Yes.
hopping?
Something very much
State
like
hopping.
that. Yes. So what is our topic today? Now, who are these people?
Yeah.
Well, let's start with who the people are. Patti, Greg, Simone, and this guy. And today we're going to be talking about the Decision Odyssey. And our lovely photo for today is a series of identical doors. How does one choose? And we're going to talk about that and maybe how those decisions happen and why sometimes we think a decision is horrible because we don't understand it and all kinds of good stuff like that. So we're going on a little odyssey about decision making.
Why is it always a little odyssey? Why isn't there an epic odyssey?
Because there was one. I mean, there is one. And, you know, it's
because there's a time limit.
There is a time limit. Exactly.
All right, let's go on a little medium-sized odyssey.
No,
How about
Greg,
that?
No, Greg, you lost the train of it. Our whole KTLO is the Odyssey.
Ah, well, it's odd. So let's leave it at that.
I see.
Let's leave it at, very, very well done.
Um,
Very well done. So where are we going to start today? Let's start with a couple of quotes. This one from Peter Drucker. And if you look on the bookshelf behind me, you'll see a couple of Drucker books. Whenever you see a successful business, someone once made a courageous decision, says Mr. Drucker. And actually probably a whole bunch of courageous decisions, but we can talk about that a little bit later. That's a kind of a conversation starter. And then this is a really interesting one from Robert Greenleaf, who's best known for servant leadership material. An important decision, you rarely have 100% of the information needed. And no matter how much time you spend on it, you're still looking for more information on how to make that decision. And after this, Greenleaf goes on to say that if you keep waiting for that information and keep waiting for the information, the decision changes. It's a different decision than what you started out trying to make. So there's no sense in trying to get 100% of the information. You never have 100% of the information. So don't expect to, is what I'm saying. Just don't expect it, okay?
So this is where we get into the classic analysis paralysis, right? I want more information. I need more information so I can make a decision that's suited to the situation that I see myself in, and yet you never will. That's a reality I think that we all face individually. And I think especially as we move into roles of organizational leadership, where perhaps the stakes go up. My career is riding on this. My credibility is riding on these things, and yet you will never have as much as you need or want to be able to make "quote unquote" a good decision.
In fact, the more information you have, the more it creates paralysis.
I would agree with that, though that's not usually the piece that we look at. And different people You're probably even familiar and versant in the Myers-Briggs framework. I've only been, indexed and cauterized, and every time you join a new group, it's like, let's do a personality inventory, blah blah blah. And I tend to be into at least some element of analytical. And analyticals tend to want information because they thrive on information, but some people thrive on intuition and a sense of instincts around where we are and where we need to be going. And so not everybody suffers from analysis paralysis.
I think you got to go with the flow sometimes. But I have to admit, too much information can be overwhelming. So I think that each of us has this balance point that we work with in terms of how much do we need to know in order to make what we think is a good decision. Not necessarily the best decision or the great decision, but sometimes, we're time poor, or there might be other factors. But, sometimes I find wading through too much actually makes me more uncomfortable or makes me less confident in making a decision.
I don't want to derail the conversation, but isn't that at the very essence of lean, agile DevOps thinking, is make the best decision you can in a time frame, execute, and then quickly come back and say, all right, what did we learn? How did it work out? What do we need to do differently in the future?
So
in other words,
context, though.
You said something, okay, but you said something really important there, is execution.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, like bear with me for just a minute, okay? You got 5 frogs on a log. One decides to jump off. How many do you have left?
You have 5, Patti.
Frogs.
Exactly, because the decision is different than doing. You get deciding and doing are 2 different things. So decision, if you're making decisions need to be based on what action is following that, right?
Well, and look at the consequence. If we think about those 5 frogs, what if the one that decided to jump off was right at the end and the really heavy one, and as it jumped off, all 4 went flying as well?
But hold on, he just decided. He didn't actually jump. Greg knew the answer to that question.
I knew this would happen, and that because I know you guys, right? But here's the thing. I think I don't want to just emphasize this because Patti said it, because Patti's really, really smart. But the thing is, there is that execution factor. And I think that's one of the elements that I really, really like about the Agile concept. And I'm disconnecting that from Agile application development, Agile manifesto, or some of the other things that normally go under Agile, is the idea is that you make the best decision that you can directionally, and then you execute. And that ties back to, and I've talked about this before, about complexity frameworks, and the idea that if you're not in a simple context, then you need to make exploration. Make as educated of a decision as you can, go do, and then learn what you can from what you did. It's like we experimented in that direction. We learned a few things about how the system is behaving currently, and now we have better information to move forward.
Right. So I asked a question the other day when we were chatting about what contributes to poor decisions, and a lot of it is the fact that we don't acknowledge that, and I love that you mentioned complexity, Greg, because we don't acknowledge that complexity is part of it. So growing organizational complexity can cloud the accountabilities and decision-making rights. And when functions are regionalized or branched, it even gets worse, right? So you're looking at clarity of accountability, which gets lost in the flow. And then knowledge sharing platforms and email threads and a whole pile of things that get mixed up in the decision-making process. It's interesting. So there's a stat that McKinsey did a survey, and 72% of senior executives actually state that they believe they fail to make the right decisions. 72% is pretty large, right? And a lot of the times the result, that is the result of no actual framework around how decisions are made or governance around that. Managers at a typical Fortune 500 company may waste more than 500,000 days a year on an ineffective decision making, mainly because they're not keeping it within the context of the decisions they should be making at their level, right?
Hey, thanks for joining, Mark. And I strongly agree with all the above. And I'm not sure where we want to dig in on this topic because it's a huge topic, right? And we want to make sure that we cover something that people can walk away with some nuggets to hold on to. But
so are you saying that we have to decide
on what we're
is that
talking
what you're
about?
saying?
yeah, what we need here is some governance that focuses on those critical elements necessary to add value.
I open the door and you walk through. This is my job. It's all I'm here to do.
We're going to have the rules. Where are the rules?
Where are the rules?
So I think the point is that we need to stop focusing on binary problems. We need to stop expecting transformation or organization in pockets of the organization. Decision making is bigger than that. I love this slide, Roy.
So before we dig into that, can you go back and emphasize stop working on binary problems or stop binary decisions? I want to hear more about that. And there's a reason why I want to hear more about that.
Well, we need to start admitting that organizations are more complex than that, right? There isn't a technology or framework that will solve complex organizational problems in a binary or in a pocket. So if you're looking at getting and we see it all the time, this new tool is going to change our world, and then the tool goes in, it's just a tool. This new way of managing change is going to difference in the world, and the whole company will be fixed. And I mean, these are binary solutions for very complex organizational problems. It's no different than in our families, right? We're not going to solve our problem by putting up a new calendar in the kitchen. It's the actions we take and the decisions we make, and who's making those decisions that will define how we manage our life better.
Wow.
I think that also comes back to the decision paralysis issue, because if you look at Hick's law or Hick-Hyman law, because Hyman then added to the experimentation what was happening around decision making. So looking at the time it takes for a person to make a decision, which in a very fast, rapid world, sometimes we have to make them very quickly indeed, and at different levels. But also too, in contrast to how many choices we have in order to make that decision within the context of that time frame. And according to Hick's law, it was really about that it would happen logarithmically, that the more choices we have, the longer it takes to make a decision. Now, I think that there's a lot of different ways that we move around that or within that, the different cognitive techniques that we can learn and employ, our capacity in terms of our reactions, understanding our communication and emotional intelligence around that, looking at all the governance and the boundaries and the frameworks that we need to work within, as well as what we can push out. So I think there's an awful lot within that can make a difference. All you have to do is look at all of even those 4 Ps. I mean, look at the depth and the interaction and the networking between even those issues that we see.
So I was going to say that's a perfect segue into organizational governance, and I choose that word very, very carefully, organizational governance, because in our line of work we hear a lot about IT governance. And I don't know if we want to discuss this here, but there's many misconceptions about what governance means. Governance is how we select what projects that we move forward with. Governance is the metrics that we use to manage IT and make sure that you're doing everything correctly. And we focus on these kind of smaller elements of governance, but governance, thank you for moving back, is these higher level things: the people, the purpose, the process, the performance of the organization in alignment with what the organization exists to do. And everybody in the organization is there to serve that purpose. And governance is how we make sure that we're doing that to the best of our ability. Now, that's a nutshell description of governance, but those are the elements that have to be there. So IT governance is just an extension of governance of the organization. I think that's an important distinction.
I just want to take this down to to a really practical pinpoint level for a second, the whole process of decision making and how it can affect us, and having a multitude of decisions. If you've had this happen, I know you've had this happen. You go to a particular website, or maybe you go to your organization's self-help portal or whatever, and there's drop downs and or buttons across, and you look at it and there's too many, and you can't decide. Well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here, is the usual response. Which one do I pick? Which way do I go? Which service desk do I contact for this particular issue? So even at that level, having a framework around the design of those things, the user interfaces, all of that is really important to understand how people make decisions, why they make the decisions they make. And usually in that case, the decision is, well, heck with this, I'm picking up the phone, I'm calling somebody, right? So
if you take a look at the psychology around hospitality menus, and you look at a menu, some pubs you can walk into and there's like 57 things to order, and you look at it and you close it and you say, I'll just have a beer. And the hospitality industry understands there's a psychology around selecting, and menus are designed really well by organizations that pay attention to that, Roy. And so if we look at our portal in the same way we would look at a menu in hospitality, we're looking at, hey, we've categorized it, we've divided it by areas of people's focus, salads, meats, whatever. And then within that, we make it as easy as possible to make a selection, and make a selection fast, because that restaurant has 12 minutes to be able to turn it around and replace you in that table in 20, right? So turn around the food in 12, and they want you out of there in 20 to 30 minutes.
See, I've got the menu thing down pat now, because I just start with the dessert, so I know how much room do I have after that to leave to choose my main and my entree.
No,
I mean,
I want to explore something that you said, Patti, because what I understood you to say is that lacking good governance, we all just go have a beer. That's what I heard you say. Is that true? Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we don't all just go have a beer. Yeah. If my leader hasn't told me what rules I have to follow, I'm just going to go have a beer. Might not allow me to keep the job. But Clemens Reddick, a colleague of mine, has a wonderful framework for organizational performance that he has put out. And when you talk about it, it's about culture, standardization, which is processes and standards, knowledge transfer, which is documentation, training, and coaching, and then continuous improvement. And if you look at that, there's a whole decision-making structure or framework around how decisions get made in an organization. I think one of the things that we struggle with is when a top leader who's supposed to be making a certain type of decision is actually down in the weeds doing frequent low-risk day-to-day decision-making. So understanding where you sit in the context of the level you're at is very valuable.
I think, Patti, that's really important. One of the things I come across a lot in organizations, and I'm talking about decision making at all levels, so not just all the way down. It's like, what do I do here? And one of the ways I've noticed that, especially for new leaders or new people within the organization, they're mimicking the others that they admire. They mimic the other way, when they see. It's a good way to start. I'm not saying it's not a bad way to start by mimicking those that you find do things well, but it's really important as well to find your own decision making style. So even with a structure, we still have a natural way of thinking and the way of processing that information and how we come to a decision. So, and intrinsically, we have this innate desire to be right. We don't want to make a wrong decision. And I think that also is reflecting of our values and our beliefs and the intent and the knowledge. And you brought out some of that stuff in the structure that I think could really help with that, because we want to make the right one and the wrong one. But see, even making no decision is still a choice, but understanding what the consequences of that can be is really important, I think. And that, in a sense, sometimes that paralysis or that desire not to be wrong, we enter that point of being overwhelmed. And I think it's because our inner sense is conflicting with the analysis we see. There can be that kind of thing. And I think that's where a structure and the things that you're talking about could be very helpful.
Yeah, I think there's there's a telling element of, if you're working in an organization at any level and you don't understand the decision structure, at least in a workable passing fashion, then there's probably 3, 4, maybe a few more reasons why that might be. But the net effect is always a negative. In other words, if you have line staff that think they're entitled or empowered, I should say empowered, sorry, empowered to make certain decisions, and they get steamrolled by managers who are making those pedestrian level decisions, that's a very disincentive. And it's also a waste of energy. Why are we making decisions that you're ultimately going to come in? One of the things that I've seen in organizations where I've been in and talked to others and others is that the tendency of leaders to be making decisions that are 1 or 2 levels beneath what they should be making. And part of the reason for that, I think, is that most leaders, myself included, have risen the ranks up to a level. And I got to this level because I was very good at operating at this level. And so when I'm at this level and I see a decision made below me, and I'm not telling me personally, but it's a tendency, we look at that and go, no, you don't have enough experience to make that decision. Let me make that decision for you, or let me tell you what the decision should have been.
This is
and
that whole control,
that's
delegation, and exactly. And this is why, whenever I'm doing the workshops or the coaching or anything around this side of it, is that we really have to understand what the rules are. What are those organization boundaries? What are the guidelines? What are the principles by which we make that? And, we know sometimes if we want to improve something, a process, at least around 20% of the process doesn't fit every situation we find ourselves in. There are sometimes we're going to have to bend the rules. Sometimes we need to break the rules. But unless we actually understand what they are and what the consequences are, unless we understand what the framework is, or if I'm unsure, where's my, my call tree, if you like, of network of understanding how to make a decision around this, or have I had the training in all the different thinking concepts that will help me come to the right decision based on a situation I find myself in? Because I know, at floor level, your manager, your team leader, or your department head are not always available in the moment a decision has to be made. So I think it's so important that we have these structures and these guidelines that, okay, if you're going to have to go outside of that frame, what are the parameters? How do we go about doing that?
So one of the things that Patti said that I think is really important is, putting a calendar in the break room or whatever it was that you said is not solving your problems. It's changing the behaviors. And I'm going to add this element, and then I will go on mute if I must. But having a communicated and clear, decision-making hierarchy is not the solution to the problem. Having one that's adhered to, that is going to help organizations. Yes. In other words, if senior leaders aren't there when decisions need to be made, but they reserve the right or have a behavior in them that says, wait, hang on, that was the wrong decision. You were wrong, you're going to be punished, or you're going to be overruled, or whatever. That's worse than having no decision making.
Well, you know what? I thought it was the situation happened to me, and it was a senior role I was in support there, and the other guy in marketing who was using our services, and something else happened, and yada yada yada. I'm not going into the whole story, but at the end of it, he got massively upset over a decision I particularly made. Went upstairs, told him all the reasons, and said what a horrible person I was for making this decision, and so on and so forth, etc. Did a very smart thing and CC'd me on that email. And as a result of that, being able to walk through and being able to write down and articulate why I made that decision and how I came to that decision. And I think that's what really saved me in that particular situation of a volatile argument between two major departments, because my boss came to me and said, it might not have been the decision I made, but you made a pretty good one based on what you had, and I'm going to back you on that. So I think this is a really critical lesson to be learned, that if you are able to understand why you've made a decision, how did you come to the decision, and articulate that within the parameters of the objectives and the focus and the values and the outcomes, then I think that, you know, you've got a pretty good leg to stand on if someone disagrees with your decision.
I think that we can, I really like what both of you said. Greg, I think one of the things that really caught me when you were talking was about structural governance. So it isn't that we have it, it's that we adhere to it and that we understand it. And a lot of, with our clients, we often will use a framework that's designed by McKinsey. So McKinsey has come up with a decision-making framework that talks about the levels of decision and what that they are within context. And they say you can increase the speed and quality of decisions by better understanding what you should be deciding upon, right? And so if you're looking at it, and I'm just going to reference my monitor here because I pulled it up. There's the top team and board should be making big bet decisions. That's infrequent, high risk, future shaping, those kinds of things. Their strategy and what have you. And then they say business unit heads and senior managers can do cross-cutting decisions, which are frequent, often high risk, collaborative, cross-functional, and require an enormous amount of communication. And then delegated decisions, which we as individuals and the working teams have an opportunity to do, which are frequent, low risk, day-to-day kind of decisions that we are allowed to make. Now, if we understand the framework and where ad hoc decisions, like you mentioned, Simone, come in, then we have an opportunity to be able to then define that. Here's where that breaks down, is if you want results, you have to have trust, you have to have conflict, you have to have some commitment, and you need to have accountability. Now, that's a framework that Patrick Lencioni always pushes out there. But in order to get results, you have to actually go through the raw and honest pieces of understanding organizationally who has decision-making rights for what and what that structure is like, and it must be well communicated. You must create a situation where conflict is allowed to happen if somebody needs to challenge that status quo, but you also need commitment and accountability around those things. And when we're doing we have 7 steps to people strategy for transformation. Our 3rd step is all about governance. So it's leadership structure. I'm just gonna hold up my little card here. Leadership structure, cross-function decision rights, the organizational network structure and understanding how decisions are made throughout the network. The difference between operational and transformational decision-making rights, because they're different. And then the responsibilities, capabilities, and roles, and how they fit within the decision-making model. Now, I'm going to tell you, in our experience and our practical experience with clients over and over and over again, usually what we run up against is people who do not have any understanding of the level of decision-making they are allowed to make within an organization, or overstepping decision-making rights that are micromanaged. And that's often where most of our confusion and lack of results get when it comes to transformation and moving forward. I would say that's equally the same for you as a person or an individual or a family member within your own family, right? If you don't understand who's in charge, your 5-year-old very well could decide exactly what you're having for dinner tonight without, right? I mean, so the structure
that depends on how much ground you're willing to give.
Yeah, but it's true. But it's true. You find in parenting circles, they talk about decision-making rights within the family and making it clear with your children who gets
That's like seeing Greg's face at the moment, laughing and saying, okay, Greg, I'm going to give you ground now. Off you go, honey.
Well, the thing is, what we heard from Patti so far is without good governance, we all just have a beer, and without good governance, the 5-year-olds take charge. So I'm not sure exactly where this is going, Patti, but I like it.
Apparently, the 5-year-old's having a beer, and we're all happy with that. So I was just gonna.
And as a public service, please do not give underage children beer or alcohol in any form, way, shape, or form.
Anybody that is allowed to have alcohol, please drink responsibly.
Yes. Have we covered it? Yes, we have. So
No.
I just want to contribute a little bit to this conversation and say that personally, I have been in several organizations where there was no clear decision-making structure. And what that leaves you with is the feeling of floating in the middle of the ocean in a little rubber tube and having absolutely no idea what to do. No boundaries, no guidance, no nothing. And when you try to make a decision, what you wind up with is paralysis. And it's not even analysis paralysis. It's just plain paralysis. You can't move in any direction because you're afraid that every direction you move in is wrong.
You could decide to take a holiday and just go with the flow of the tide.
I think that's what I did.
Well, and there is another organizational pathology that I think is worth mentioning, and that is lack of clear decision-making structure or lack of adherence to that isn't always by accident. I have seen that weaponized. If you have senior leaders who reserve veto rights on all decisions made everywhere, and your quote unquote poor decision can be held against you in a court of politics organizationally, then you've got significant cultural issues. You don't have that trust that you were talking about, Patti. You don't have that clarity and vision, direction, and execution. And what you end up with is just paralysis. I mean, sorry for the the violent overtone, but when you beat a dog too much, the dog cowers in the corner and doesn't do anything, doesn't respond to the discipline, doesn't respond to anything. And organizations that get to that point, and I've seen them, organizations that get to that point are completely immobilized to do anything.
I think this comes back to that fear too of, intrinsically we have that desire to always be right. We want to make sure that whatever decision we make, we're not going to make a mistake because it feels so horrible to make a mistake. We don't want to make that mistake. And especially when we get into a leadership role, especially new leaders, even ones that have been there a long time, there are reasons we make bad decisions. Maybe we're relying too much on our past experience and trying to apply old experiences to new situations, or we're addicted to the corporate politics and we end up in the gameplay. It could be we have a lack of clarity around what is our purpose here. So we're sort of in the gray area and a bit off track. It could be because we're mismanaging our resources. We don't understand what our resources are and what their potential is and what we can help bring about and make them do. It might be because we've been so, as you were saying, Patti, we're down in the swamp, down in the mire, that we're not seeing the opportunities. Or sometimes it's just we're nervous, we're new to it, we're not quite sure what to do, and we're not trusting ourselves enough.
One of the reasons we do a cultural assessment before we do anything within an organization is we learn to understand what the culture looks like in terms of top-down versus interdependency. And if you're in an organization that is top-down, it's very clear what the decision-making rights are. It's the bully at the top. It's the guy who is going to politicize everything you do to please himself. And that's one end of the spectrum. And when that happens, we can honestly tell them, listen, this is what your culture looks like. And at this point, if you want to try and achieve this transformation, you are going to weigh too heavily on the technology, not enough on the humanity, and you will not be able to innovate. You will not have the opportunity to move forward.
That's when you get the response. Who, me?
It's really interesting if you can do the right analysis in advance. You could really speak to some of that. Now, some organizations you're never going to have any traction with, and some you won't even bring it up. There's no point. But in other organizations, they're willing to be open enough to recognize that there are some missing pieces. If you can remove it from emotional, personal, feeling like they're emotionally or personally attacked, you have the opportunity to say, here's a structure. Here's a structure I'd like you to at least try. And then you can put that. And governance actually guides culture, but it has to be decided at the top, right?
Yes.
Governance helps to define what that culture will be doing and directs the organization toward the results you're trying to achieve.
And do you know the key question I love to ask when it comes to looking at it from that perspective is it's not about what you do as an organization or an individual. It's not about what you do. Who do you want to be?
As an organization or as an individual? Sorry, Roy, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and that comes back to something that we've been talking about since the beginning. That's the journey, right? To who you want to be. That's your destination. And so, yeah, I totally get that. Those decisions have to be made early on, or, you know, the unenviable position of, let's say, a CEO who comes into an organization that's in trouble, right? There are some people who specialize in that, being turnaround CEOs, and they're very good at it, and have to make a lot of decisions rapidly. Who stays, who goes, what direction is the organization going to go in? Do we change our products? Do we change it? There's a myriad of decisions that need to be made. And I think that one of the qualities, you know, earlier we were talking about not having enough information ever to make a clear decision, right? And one of the leadership qualities that these people have is the ability to know when they have enough information to make that decision.
Bingo.
Yeah, and that's something that's really, I think you have to decide that for yourself. When is there enough information? And I've had this conversation with a friend of mine who's was a chairman and CEO of a large, you know, Fortune 100 company, and who said, just, you know, surround yourself with smart people, listen to what they say, and make a decision. You get it. You have to have enough information to make that decision, but to overwhelm yourself puts you in the position of that graphic you have of the bunny sitting in the middle of thousands of carrots, Simone, right? which one do I pick? I don't know which one to pick. And you become overwhelmed. And I think that is part of a situation in which all of us find ourselves right now. There you go. There's the rabbit. We find ourselves in this situation an awful lot these days because we're bombarded with information from every direction. You know, we have news sources. We have to decide which ones we trust. We have, you know, different corporate newsletters and resources and portals and self-help, and all of this information is just in a torrent coming at us. Slack messages, email, whatever it happens to be. We're getting bombarded all the time with information. How do we make that decision? We find ourselves in the position of the bunny. I'm going to title myself. It's going to be my new title. Is going to be, you know, Roy Atkinson, Corporate Bunny. And they'll have to figure out what it means.
Now, do you know what? I just want to pick up on that little point. You know, for the YouTube guys, I need to, for the image to show, I found this image while I was doing some other research. And one of my favorite things, of course, is looking at procrastination. So procrastination.com has got some pretty cool stuff. And this is where I found this image. And I found it quite interesting because, and Patti, I'm going to ask your opinion about this because, you know, the rabbit is looking at, they're all carrots. So, you know, why can't I'll just keep eating my way through until I finish my carrots. Isn't it great? Look at how much I have. Isn't this brilliant? But at the same time, it's like, well, which one do I choose first? So we can have sometimes similar information and just keep consuming, but then just get stuck and go, seriously, is this all I have? I'm only going to get carrots. And I think that's also another issue that comes into the decision making is not having transparency or visibility of alternatives. and that type of thing. So I know Patti and Greg, you'll probably have something to say around that.
So listen, if you're going to be making tough decisions the way Roy described them, there are a couple of things. One, you have to decide. Not making a decision is also making a decision, but it's not going to get you anywhere because action can't follow if you don't decide. If you want to make a decent decision, having those people around you, like Roy said, that you trust, means you have to be vulnerable enough and open-minded enough to listen. If you want commitment to those decisions, you have to let people know that they were heard. But you also, as a leader, have to own it. So if you're owning the decision, you've actually got a structure around how you are making decisions and what those look like. You choose one, and then you can't say I have 27,000 decisions sitting around me. I don't know what to pick. You have to move forward. That's simply the thing. So when you choose one, it's because you've taken the time to build the trust. You're willing to accept a little conflict to challenge you on that decision. And then you're willing to communicate in a way that allows commitment to occur within the organization. And when you can do that, and then you really foster accountability in it. So what are the accountable actions that follow this at every level? So if I'm making the top decision, then you folks have to figure out what commitment looks like. And this is, here are the parameters we have, here are the constraints, and then you can move forward. But it does feel like leadership does feel like that bunny sometimes because there are so many things you have to focus on. The idea is to look at the system. So what are the million carrots going to contribute to the system and how is the system going to benefit?
And I do feel, oh, sorry, Patti. Yeah.
If you can take a look at it in terms of what is best for the system, it's not always going to be what's best for the IT department,
Exactly.
and it may not be what's best for HR.
And
however,
I honestly,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I know, I was just going to say from a perspective of helping grow our people and how we help them understand and start learning to take decisions and empowering them to do so, that they often feel like this bunny as well, that they we need to guide them in being able to do that. And that's, I think, where some of the things that both you and Greg are talking about in those structures and the guidance we put in place. But I think there's certainly skill sets, but we have to allow them the room to practice those decisions as well.
Sure. I think, but remember, organizations are a balance of results and humanity. And so we can't, if all we do is focus on humanity, if that's all we focus on, we're not going to be able to make good decisions. Exactly. Right. So leadership, we have to stop, and I've heard Greg say this many times, that we have to stop this airy-fairy idea of what leadership really looks like, because ideally we have to understand these individuals live in an organization that has to get results. That's just the reality, right? Yes. So the balance between the two is really important. Without a governance structure of some sort, you can't actually own the balance.
And that's what I really enjoy. I actually do love that because, and I think if, as a good leader, if you're able to convey and articulate that, this is still business. There are decisions that we have to make. I've mentioned it before, being involved in mergers and acquisitions. There were lots of decisions that are made that people are not happy with or they don't understand. But if you can help articulate it and they understand it, that, hey, business is still business. We have taken into consideration certain parts of that and what your thoughts and feelings may be. However, there is still the hard yards that have to be done.
But the structure defines the autonomy.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So your governance will define the autonomy they have. So if you aren't clear on how not to micromanage and what kind of decisions that your people are allowed to make, and they're clear on it, you're not going to get as much of the dichotomy that you will feel or the resistance that you feel.
And finding that balance, I really like that side of it. I think it's amazing when you get people together and go through those structures and workshop workshop those structures and say, well, why are you making decisions at that level when we need your brains and focus at this level? Where is the trust? Where is the delegation? Where's the credibility and the training in people's capability to do that, so that we actually do create a really good decision structure that people can work with and move with, and working in the flexibility for those outside areas that will impact that at times, where sometimes we make a decision outside that structure. As long as we have the understanding of how we might go about that and what is the support mechanism behind that, then I think, we've got something that's fairly healthy in terms of our decision-making ability.
Roy, you're on mute.
Why did I not come off mute? That's very
Yeah.
interesting. Anyway, and now I've forgotten what I was going to say. So never mind. I'm going back on mute.
Well, it must not have been very important then. A reference to Steve Martin Code. Gosh, you be tough audience, right?
We can always ask what Mark or Alfredo have to add to the conversation right now, since
Why
they've
would we
decided
want
to
to do
join
that?
us.
Well,
I don't know. Variety,
while they're
comedic
jumping,
value.
well, they're and that's why I'm here. While they're jumping for the mute button, let me add this little bit. Is most people, in my opinion, understand that I work for a corporation for a specific reason, to help pursue the business goals and objectives of that organization. I think where we get into trouble with empowerment and decision making is where we're not clear, and people will fill that void. So if leadership is clear and precise about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and to the best of your ability to be transparent, which isn't always possible with strategic decisions in publicly held corporations, that people get that. They understand that there's going to be decisions made and you get to make them or have to make them. And I may or may not like that. It's where we're not clear about that I think we get into trouble. You didn't tell us anything. You said A and now you're doing Z, and we're confused. You seem to be disconnected and lacking in any kind of coherent vision or strategy. That's where we get trouble in organizations, not by saying that senior management is going to make these decisions and that's the way it's going to be.
Yeah, clarity around communication and purpose, absolute.
I would say that, plus we have a tendency to try and make it nice for the people, which is disingenuous. So we have this idea of what communication should look like to keep, people from storming the castle, but
have fun storming the castle.
Sorry, living in France, there's a few around here if you want to try it.
So, but the reality is, the BS meters are pretty big in an organization, right down to your team workers. So, if you're looking at having a strategy and you're trying to communicate this airy-fairy kind of not quite on the line of where you're going, and you're telling them this to make them feel better, they know you're doing it. And I think that's the other piece, right? That's that disingenuous idea.
Exactly. There's got to be something truly authentic about it. There has to be, people have to feel that the decision you're making is an honest one, that the decision you're making is for the right purpose. And that's why I come back to understanding, what is the business there to do? What are we trying to do? Where are we trying to go? Who are we as an organization? And who are the type of people that we actually need to help us go along that path? And that covers all levels, who those people happen to be and what are those capabilities. So I think people definitely need to feel that whatever decision you've made has been made from an honest place, that you've had the right information, that you're not making a decision based on bad data, that all the reports that you've been receiving from the bottom all the way up, regardless of those levels, weekly, quarterly, 6 monthly, whatever it is, we make decisions based on what we know. And we sometimes we have to guesstimate what we don't know, but in the context of where the organization is headed and what they're trying to do. So I think that there's a lot to be understood and discussed. And if people feel that we've taken in the accuracies as best we can, then I usually don't see too much of an issue there. It's usually when they feel that the data is being corrupted or the decision has been corrupted in some way that we find that we have the difficulties.
So one of the things that I've personally experienced is when you get into a more senior role is you become keenly aware that there are elements at play that are not necessarily appropriate to share publicly. And in some cases, decisions must be made for reasons that can't necessarily be explained or articulated to the satisfaction
Correct.
of the hearers because they don't understand the context. I've made decisions as a CIO that the net result was I looked like an idiot, and I was not. I made the right decision, and I just have to take that. That's just part of being a decision maker within the organization. And by looking like an idiot, I mean, I could not get my line staff to understand why that was the right decision or why that was the right direction, and I didn't even try, because then that just is weak and ineffective leadership. So sometimes there are things that happen in corporations where, in fact, I've done this my entire career. It's like, oh, those people above me are just crazy people, right? And then you become one of them and you go, oh, I didn't understand what happens up here. And it's happened.
Now I get it.
Every level
Yeah.
I've moved in an organization, I've had that epiphany. So you'd think I'd eventually learn, but that is most noted when you move into an executive or a senior role, depending on how the organization is structured, is you understand that there's more going on than you could possibly understand. And when you get into a publicly traded corporation at that level, there are things that you legally can't talk about that have to be released through the right sequence of events, et cetera, et cetera. And you have to boldly handle those decisions. And you cannot pander to staff and say, oh, let me give you a watered down version of why this is a great decision or why this is not a bad decision. And this is the balance that you run when you're in a position like that. Is if your predisposition is you want everybody to like you and to think that you've made good decisions, you will make poor decisions and you will be an ineffective leader.
That's a very clear point. Not everyone's going to like you, and you're not going to like everyone. That's a normal human thing. I like you, Greg.
I was going to say, is there a governance structure here?
There's a governance structure here. But, I think when it comes to, as I said, that honesty and that transparency about making a decision is not necessarily about giving away the information or the context or having to justify why you made a particular decision. It's not about that. I think, most of the time what I've found has worked has just simply been that, look, guys, there's a lot of factors at play here. There are a lot of factors that are external as well as internal at different levels. This is not something I am at liberty to discuss. I have a confidentiality and a responsibility in my role to make certain decisions at certain levels. And that is the way it works.
There is an art.
I think, yeah, there is that's not exactly the way I necessarily say things, but I just wanted to get the point across that, when I talk about honesty and transparency, that it's not about justifying your decision necessarily, and it's not about giving away the information that you're not supposed to. And it is about taking the responsibility for your level of where you are at in terms of how you contribute to the way in which the organization is run.
So there is an art to communication, and there is an art to understanding that there are ways of communicating decision making that is not disingenuous. You don't make something up because you have to keep a secret, right? But if you have to keep secrets, if you are continually using your communication to align to the purpose of the organization because you as a leader have been clear upon the purpose of the organization, you will gain a lot more commitment. The second thing you need to do when you're communicating is, prior to pushing information out, you need the opportunity to hear a few voices, and you don't have to tell them the details of why, but you do need to hear from voices within the organization. And that's key to be able to not just make a good decision, but have a pulse on the response that you are going to be dealing with.
It is. And it's very dynamic, isn't it, Patti? It's something that it's a constant turnaround all the time. And if you're not listening, not just saying what the decision is, if you're not listening, you're not going to be gathering the information that gives you the right context in which to make the decisions.
Or even sharing. So we have something that when we're working with organizations at the senior leadership, we call it the beauty and the beast syndrome, right? So the beauty and the beast syndrome is this. Here's this guy who turned into a beast. He's so embarrassed about what he looks like. He locks himself in a castle because he doesn't know how to deal with how people will be responding to him. So he locks himself in this castle and closes all the doors. And he doesn't share why, and he doesn't share any information about what's going on, but he continues to make decisions for the kingdom. And eventually people start filling in the holes. They start making stuff up, and rumors go around, and people start talking about it, and they start assuming. Their gut starts to get uncomfortable because they're hearing nothing, but they're seeing things happen. They're seeing decisions and edicts come down. And the next thing you know, and this is where we talk about, they're storming the castle. And the whole idea of keeping quiet as a beast is to avoid storming the castle. And yet that's the result you get in the end.
Exactly.
Right? And so we work through a whole Beauty and the Beast scenario with our clients to talk about the importance of the manner in which communication is shared, why it's shared, how it's shared, and how to keep those secrets, but still be able to communicate and be transparent about a few things.
So here's, first of all, I would like to volunteer to be the beast. I think I fit that role pretty much. But also, I'm going to kind of tie some things up here and try to explain from a very pedestrian perspective about why it's necessary to have some kind of structure. Imagine, if you will, I sound like Rod Serling now, but you walk into a fast food place for the very first time, and you're presented with that menu. And the menu has things on it like the Skippy, the double Skippy, Skippy with cheese, Skip-O-Matic.
I can fit all of those descriptions
the
already.
Giant Skippy. and you stand there and you look at it, and now you're facing the person who's going to take the order, and they're looking at you like, would you please make a decision here? Just tell me what you want. And you're looking at the menu going, what's a Skippy?
Me!
Right? So if you don't have the information that you need in order to make a decision, a Skippy is a hamburger. Okay, I get that now.
Not a hamburger.
And a giant Skippy is a Skippy hamburger with cheese, lettuce, tomato, and a milkshake. How am I supposed to know that the first time I walk in?
You forgot the beetroot.
Yeah, well, that. So you have to disseminate the information. There has to be some kind of structure for that person to grasp. Okay, they have to understand what the Skippy is, and then they can make a coherent decision about what they want to have for lunch. And therein is our episode, folks.
But relevance, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Very important.
You cannot have a coherent, positive, good decision without relevance.
And without onions. So we'll just...
So to summarize, without governance, we're all going out for a beer and burgers, and the 5-year-olds are going to be in charge, and the peasants are going to storm your castle while you're having a beer.
We've got it.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Got it.
That's it.
That's the summary. Yep, in one.
So check out KTLOlearn.com. We're going to be posting some further information up there about some of the things we've discussed. And we'll be here next week at the same time for episode 19.
19.
Same time.
19?
KTLO.
Keeping the learning on.